I was recently looking at a series of medical diagrams, but they weren't for a hospital. They were for a transformation. In the sketches, there's a man named Bartholomew Kuma. He's massive, built like a fortress. But in the early panels, his eyes have this quiet, devastating kindness. He's being dragged to the operating table in chains. There are no guards forcing him down, no screams of resistance. Instead, the scene is eerily professional, almost mundane. He sits there, calmly discussing the terms and conditions of his own erasure with a scientist, as if they were settling a standard insurance claim. What's truly unsettling isn't the cold steel or the lasers, it's the pen. Kuma picks it up and signs a contract that effectively ends his existence as a human being. He isn't trading his life for glory or a throne. He's trading his soul for a medical procedure to save his daughter. It's a perfect logical transaction. To the state, he isn't a martyr. He's just a high-performing asset being upgraded. We often like to think of tyranny as a monster breaking down our door in the middle of the night. We imagine a struggle, a clear villain, and a moment of heroic defiance. But Kuma's story suggests something much more clinical and far more terrifying. It suggests that modern power doesn't actually want to kill you. It wants you to stay alive, to stay productive, and, most importantly, to agree to your own dehumanization. When you watch him slowly lose his ability to feel, to remember, and finally to think, you realize that the system didn't break him. It simply offered him a deal where the only rational choice was to stop being a person. It makes you wonder, if the state can make the act of erasing yourself look like a responsible, even noble decision, do they even need to use force anymore? Or have we already started signing our own contracts piece by piece, just to stay functional in a world that only values us as machines?
That image, Kuma calmly signing away his humanity, is exactly what we need to hold on to for this deep dive.
Right, because the mission here is to explore the invisible architectures of modern control.
Precisely. We are going to systematically examine how contemporary power structures subtly erode individual autonomy. And they do this through three main avenues: legal frameworks, corporate culture, and digital surveillance.
It's a paradigm shift. We're so conditioned to look for the violent overthrow, the obvious dictator.
The overt physical coercion.
Exactly. But contemporary control weaponizes the very institutions designed to protect you. It transforms democratic structures into instruments of compliance.
To illustrate this, consider a mid-level legal architect. He operates in a state where the concept of national stability has effectively become the highest possible civic virtue.
Right, and Elias isn't a thug. His function isn't to break the law.
No, his job is to refine it, to build the legal bridges between universal human rights and the shifting, urgent needs of the state apparatus.
So on a totally mundane Tuesday, Elias is sitting in his glass-walled office. He's finalizing the text for something called the Social Harmony Amendment.
And the legal logic he uses is, on paper, absolutely flawless.
Flawless. He argues that to protect collective well-being, the state just needs the statutory authority to temporarily suspend individual privacy protections during periods of perceived civil unrest.
The phrasing there is the trap. Words like temporarily suspend and perceived unrest, those are legally malleable.
They stretch.
They stretch. They create a framework where the exception quietly becomes the permanent rule.
And Elias actually sees the application of his work almost immediately. He looks out his office window and watches a small group of protesters gathering in the plaza below.
But they aren't met by riot police.
Oh. No batons, no tear gas. They're simply dispersed by a synchronized notification on their mobile devices.
A formal legal notice.
Exactly. A ping that informs them their biometric data has just been logged via facial recognition, and that their social credit scores are now undergoing a formal review process simply because of their proximity to an unsanctioned gathering.
Elias initially feels this surge of professional pride. The system he engineered worked perfectly. No violence, no property damage.
No martyrs for the opposition to rally around.
But then he catches his own reflection in the glass, and the reality of the mechanism hits him. He realizes he has just written the exact legal parameters that will eventually silence his own children.
He built a perfectly reasonable cage.
And that realization highlights the core tension we're analyzing today. What Elias participated in is known in political science as autocratic legalism, a term defined heavily by scholars like Javier Corrales.
It totally flips our traditional understanding of democratic collapse. During the Cold War, democratic backsliding was loud.
It was undeniable.
Right. Military coups, occupying government broadcasting stations, blatant election fraud. The violence was immediate.
The tank in the public square.
The tank in the square. Everyone knew exactly when the democracy died. But today, legally elected heads of state use the law itself to systematically limit liberalism.
They don't destroy the democratic facade. They move into it and they hollow it out from the inside.
And the methodology for this hollowing out is incredibly systematic. Autocratic legalism operates on three core principles. The first is the use of the law.
Which means an executive branch gains overwhelming control over the legislature and the judiciary, usually right after a totally legitimate electoral victory.
They win fairly.
Right.
But once they have that majority, they don't suspend the Constitution. They pass a rapid succession of autocratic laws that legally favor the consolidation of their own power.
While simultaneously structurally weakening the opposition, you look at historical precedents like Venezuela under Hugo Chavez. The ruling party utilized their parliamentary majorities to pass legislation granting the executive these sweeping new decree powers.
And it was all achieved through procedurally correct mechanisms.
Completely constitutional. And that procedural correctness is the shield. When international observers raise alarms, the regime just points to the legislative record. They say, look, we are strictly following the democratic will of the people.
It neuters the language of human rights advocacy. You can't accuse a government of acting illegally when they possess the power to continuously redefine what legality is.
Right. Which brings us to the second principle, the abuse of the law. This is the inconsistent, targeted, biased implementation of existing regulations.
This is usually aimed squarely at independent media and civil society.
Instead of sending soldiers to shut down an opposition newspaper, which triggers international sanctions instantly, they use administrative harassment.
They flood pro-government media with state advertising funds while pulling all public funding from independent outlets.
Or they weaponize regulatory agencies. A tax authority suddenly audits the personal finances of investigative journalists.
Or a broadcasting commission threatens to revoke television licenses over microscopic infractions they ignored for decades.
Fines for alleged libel against state officials. The goal isn't even to close the outlet immediately. It's to force it into bankruptcy or rigorous self-censorship.
They create an environment where private media organizations either refuse to cover political news to avoid retaliation, or they voluntarily adopt the government's narrative just to stay in business.
And the third principle locks it all together, the non-use of the law.
State-sanctioned illegality.
Exactly. When the ruling party or its financial backers violate the law, the captured agencies simply ignore the complaints.
Electoral irregularities in districts favoring the ruling party. Ignored. Violence against government critics. Uninvestigated by the police.
The law becomes a one-way street, ruthlessly applied to the opposition, completely suspended for the ruling elite.
Sociologist Kim Lane-Chappell broadened this understanding by introducing this concept of the Frankenstate.
A fascinating, highly sophisticated legal maneuver.
Autocrats construct new legal structures by cherry-picking isolated constitutional provisions from established liberal democracies. They act like legal scavengers.
They might take a specific judicial appointment mechanism from a European nation, grab a media regulation framework from North America, and adopt an electoral districting rule from somewhere else entirely.
And if you look at any single one of those provisions in isolation, it looks perfectly normal. You can point to a thriving democracy and say, well, they use this exact same rule.
But when you stitch these isolated provisions together into a single new jurisdiction, the resulting amalgamation systematically undermines the democratic order.
Because the original checks and balances, the context that kept those specific laws from becoming tyrannical in their home countries, are intentionally left behind.
You are left with a monster built from the severed limbs of liberal democracies. It centralizes power while presenting a flawless outward appearance of international legal norms.
There is actually a recognizable 10-step incremental playbook used to achieve this Frankenstate reality. It shows just how gradually the architecture of control is assembled.
Step 1 is innocuous. Winning free and fair elections. You enter through the front door, usually riding a wave of populist anger.
Step 2 is utilizing that initial popularity to capture the legislature, often by portraying the existing body as irredeemably corrupt.
Step 3 happens fast, capturing the courts. And they don't fire judges outright. That causes an uproar.
They lower the mandatory retirement age.
Yes. They lower the age, instantly empty the Supreme Court, and fill the sudden vacancies with loyalists. Or they just pack the court by expanding the number of seats. Once the courts are captured, executive immunity is secured.
Then step 4 targets the bureaucracy. They systematically remove civil service protections under the guise of draining the swamp or streamlining government.
The result is the mass termination of nonpartisan officials. They are replaced by individuals selected solely for political loyalty.
Step 5 builds on that by dismantling any remaining checks on executive power. Emergency decrees become normalized.
Step 6 is the neutralization of independent oversight.
The referees.
Right, the electoral commissions, the independent auditors. The autocrat fills these positions with loyalists, making sure the referees wear the ruling party's jersey.
Step 7 harnesses the media landscape, like we discussed with the abuse of the law, creating a vast echo chamber by transferring network ownership to friendly oligarchs.
Step 8 targets the opposition directly, defunding civil groups, labeling human rights organizations as foreign agents to cut off their international funding.
Step 9 crosses into physical intimidation. The state encourages, or conspicuously ignores, private violence against critics. It creates a climate of fear without leaving state fingerprints.
And finally, Step 10 locks the system in place, rewriting the election laws. Gerrymandering, altering voting methods, ensuring the ruling party possesses a permanent structural advantage.
By relying on lawyers rather than soldiers, the transition to autocracy is completed without a single tank in the streets.
To really grasp how legal institutions legitimize this control, we have to look at Ernst Frankel's concept of the dual state. He developed this framework while analyzing the legal system of the Third Reich.
Frankl observed that authoritarian regimes rarely abolish the law entirely. They operate through two parallel systems. The first is the normative state,
which contains the recognizable remnants of the traditional legal order. It protects private property, enforces business contracts, manages routine administrative law.
It seems counterintuitive for an autocracy to have a normative state.
But it serves a vital strategic purpose. It provides the legal predictability necessary to maintain a functioning capitalist economy. It honors international trade commitments.
It projects a continuous image of rationality and stability to domestic businesses and foreign investors.
If you only ever interact with the normative state, you might genuinely believe you live in a society governed by the rule of law.
But operating alongside it and entirely superseding it is the prerogative state.
The realm of arbitrary, unconstrained executive power.
Terror, extrajudicial measures, indefinite detention applied to anyone perceived as a political threat.
And the crucial dynamic is that the protections of the normative state are strictly conditional.
They depend entirely on the political will of the executive. At any moment, the executive can decide you are no longer protected by the normative state and you fall instantly under the jurisdiction of the prerogative state.
The juxtaposition of these two states shows how legal institutions actively legitimize evil. The appearance of morality and routine rights protection within the normative state functions as a psychological anesthetic for the broader population.
It preempts mass criticism. Most citizens engaged in routine economic activities never experience the terror of the prerogative state. They see traffic laws enforced and contracts honored, which creates a durable veneer of absolute legitimacy.
And this systemic legal legitimation has a profound psychological impact on the bureaucrats operating within the system. It leads directly to what Hannah Arendt termed the banality of evil.
Arendt observed that the architects of atrocities were rarely sociopathic monsters. They were utterly ordinary bureaucrats, functioning within a legally structured hierarchy.
They experience profound psychological numbing. Their focus narrows entirely to the procedural correctness of their immediate administrative actions. They sever their connection to the broader moral consequences.
A striking historical example of this is Georg Conrad Morgan. He was a judge and an SS investigator in Nazi Germany. His record defies our standard expectations of villainy.
He aggressively utilized his legal authority to prosecute corruption, theft, and unauthorized killings within the concentration camp system.
He actually had camp commanders arrested and executed for embezzlement and arbitrary cruelty that fell outside standard operating procedures.
Yet, Morgan viewed the overarching state-sanctioned extermination programs as legally acceptable.
He didn't prosecute the Holocaust. He prosecuted unauthorized deviations from the bureaucratic implementation of the Holocaust.
Because the mass extermination was mandated by the highest executive authority and processed through correct legal channels, his rigid adherence to legal categories blinded him entirely to the immense moral horror.
He vigorously opposed illegal corruption by camp guards. It demonstrates how legal frameworks can completely recalibrate an educated individual's moral compass.
If an atrocity is codified, documented, and processed through the correct channels, the bureaucrat ceases to view it as an atrocity. They view it as a logistical parameter.
This brings the reality of authoritarian structures away from historical extremes and right into the mechanics of everyday compliance. To explore this transition from state-level legal coercion to corporate-level social coercion, I want to detail an account from a professional forum.
This is regarding a high-level creative director at a global technology firm.
Right. She resigned at the absolute peak of her career, and her reasoning had nothing to do with workload or compensation. She described living with a phantom presence in every executive meeting.
An unspoken, heavy set of behavioral and ideological boundaries.
She recounted a specific project review. Her team was finalizing the deployment of a new content sorting algorithm. She recognized significant, potentially harmful, ethical implications regarding how this algorithm amplified polarizing content.
She drafted comprehensive notes to present a critique.
But before she even opened her mouth, she experienced a profound physical hesitation. She scanned the faces of her peers around the conference table, rapidly calculating the risk this critique would pose to her professional reliability rating.
Both the formal company metric and the informal metric of her reputation. She was executing a complex risk assessment matrix in real time, weighing ethical responsibility against professional survival.
And as she looked around, she saw her colleagues engaged in the exact same silent calculus. Everyone was nodding, projecting an impenetrable performance of corporate alignment.
In that moment of intense social pressure, she deleted her critical notes.
She actively erased her own ethical objection. She replaced it with a generic slide detailing strategies for increasing user engagement.
And she noted that her superior never threatened her. No one ordered her to remain silent. The suppression was entirely internally generated.
It was the psychological weight of the digital public sphere manifesting within the physical office space. She realized she was no longer functioning as an ethical agent. She had become a curated, optimized version of herself, designed solely for survival in a culture that consistently rewards compliance over conscience.
She described it as slowly disappearing, erasing herself one self-censored thought at a time. The psychological weight driving this is a direct consequence of the modern digital public sphere and cancel culture.
While cancel culture is frequently defended as necessary moral accountability for those in power, its operational reality across broad populations functions as a highly efficient mechanism of public shaming and severe reputational damage.
The psychological impacts on individuals navigating this environment are measurable and deeply debilitating. The primary consequence is the installation of a chronic, baseline elevation of anxiety manifesting in three distinct forms.
The first is anticipatory anxiety. This is the constant looming dread of what might happen. The mental rehearsal of apologies for statements you haven't even made yet.
Or the retroactive panic that a comment made years ago will be completely decontextualized and weaponized.
Compounding that is intense social anxiety. The fundamental human fear of being judged, ostracized, or publicly humiliated by your peer group.
In an evolutionary context, being exiled from the tribe meant death. The digital environment triggers that exact same primal fear of social death.
The third form is existential anxiety. The profound realization that a single misstep or a targeted campaign of deliberate misinterpretation can lead to the total loss of your identity, your professional standing, and your livelihood.
It is the fear of total erasure from the societal fabric, and this triad of anxieties is exponentially amplified by the always online behavioral pattern.
Modern platforms demand constant connection. This creates a continuous culture of risk. Individuals are hypervigilant because these platforms function as permanent, searchable, context-free records.
Your opinions and actions are evaluated in real time by a limitless, highly reactive audience. This environment enforces a pervasive climate of self-surveillance.
You are constantly monitoring your own behavior, your tone, anticipating how an unknown, faceless audience might react based on rapidly shifting moral standards.
The psychological distress caused by the threat of public shaming is uniquely severe now because the enforcement mechanism is entirely decentralized. The attack doesn't come from a single authority figure you can confront.
It comes from all directions simultaneously as a swarm,
leaving the target feeling powerless, overwhelmingly scrutinized, and profoundly socially isolated, even if they are physically surrounded by people.
This dynamic extends deeply into the modern workplace, heavily impacting professional behavior through the lens of political and ideological fit. To understand how this shapes corporate culture, we have to look at the Attraction Selection Attrition Framework, the ASA framework.
This explains how workplace cultures naturally homogenize over time. First, individuals are attracted to organizations whose stated values match their own.
Second, Organizations select candidates who demonstrate culture fit during the hiring process. They hire people who align with existing behavioral norms.
The third component, attrition, is where control solidifies. Individuals who are hired but realize they don't actually fit the homogenized culture typically experience attrition. They leave voluntarily because the environment is exhausting, or they are forced out through marginalization.
Political ideology is a persistent identity marker. It rarely changes just because you change jobs. Therefore, perceived political fit becomes a crucial daily metric for psychological survival within the institution.
The empirical reality for ideological misfits employees whose views don't align with the prevailing culture is fraught with danger. When they perceive a poor person-organization fit, they instantly recognize the structural risks.
They understand that voicing a dissenting opinion carries a high probability of being socially marginalized, passed over for promotions, or subjected to workplace incivility.
To survive where attrition is the likely outcome of authenticity, these individuals unlocked a facade of conformity.
It's a deliberate, exhausting performance. They intentionally withhold their factual knowledge and professional opinions. They continuously assess the communication climate in every meeting, every Slack channel, every hallway conversation.
They calculate the probability of triggering conflict, and the vast majority of the time, they choose the safety of silence.
Research shows that this specific willingness to self-censor acts as a crucial statistical mediator. It's not just the existence of ideological dissimilarity that harms the employee. You can work with people you disagree with and remain healthy if you can express that disagreement respectfully.
The profound damage occurs due to the specific, active suppression of one's own views to avoid penalties. This continuous self-censoring strongly correlates with significantly lower job satisfaction and a diminished sense of social community.
You feel entirely alone while surrounded by colleagues. The cognitive load of maintaining this facade is immense. The employee constantly monitors their natural reactions, suppresses thoughts, and artificially constructs aligned responses.
It expends enormous emotional energy, leading directly to chronic psychological depletion. It is a primary predictor of emotional exhaustion, severe burnout, and increased turnover in tensions. The performance simply cannot be sustained indefinitely.
And the damage inflicts severe structural harm on the organization itself. Systematic self-censorship creates a highly dangerous false impression of consensus. Management looks around, sees everyone nodding, and assumes the strategy is flawless.
It's closely related to groupthink. It prevents critical views and ethical objections from ever surfacing. The quality of group decision-making degrades, creativity is stifled, and the organization becomes functionally blind to its own flaws.
The culture of enforced silence ensures the institution only hears the echoes of its own assumptions. And sociological research indicates this willingness to self-censor is often higher among specific demographics. Younger employees, those with lower formal education levels, and women often report higher rates,
suggesting that individuals with less structural power, or those adopting more interdependence-oriented social behaviors, are far more likely to internalize the intense pressure to conform.
This internalization of pressure moves us into the third architecture of control, where the physical and digital environments merge. Consider the account of a young urban planning activist named Leo.
He lives in a highly advanced democracy, a metropolis deeply integrated with digital infrastructure. He isn't a political revolutionary. His activism focuses on mundane civic issues like zoning laws.
But he lives in the era of the transparent citizen. His experience during a localized election cycle demonstrates how this functions. Every time he used search engines to research alternative transit funding models, a perfectly legal inquiry, he received highly targeted ads for government-approved civic engagement programs within minutes.
He wasn't blocked from researching. He was being aggressively guided. He began to feel a constant, invisible gaze. He was experiencing the reality of the 21st century panopticon.
And this feeling manifested physically. One evening, Leo was walking past a newly installed smart lamppost, openly equipped with high-definition facial recognition and environmental sensors.
As he approached it, he felt an overwhelming, irrational urge to physically straighten his posture.
He subtly hid his mobile phone in his jacket pocket. He had committed no crime. He carried no contraband. Yet the sheer technological capacity of the environment to monitor him forced his body into a posture of compliance.
The possibility of being analyzed had taken up permanent residence in his subconscious. The psychological adaptation he underwent is profound. Gradually, he altered his civic behavior.
They stopped attending localized community planning meetings, assuming his attendance was logged and correlated with his digital profile. He entirely stopped posting his thoughts on urban policy online.
The invisible architecture of surveillance never issued a warrant. It simply adjusted the environmental variables until the psychological cost of dissent felt overwhelmingly high.
He became a perfect, frictionless citizen by becoming an entirely invisible one. His free will quietly eroded under ambient pressure. The infrastructure didn't break him. It smoothly incentivized his withdrawal.
If the unavoidable price of a highly optimized smart city is a fearful, chronically self-policing citizenry, we have effectively traded our human autonomy for a very polished, highly technological version of silence.
From a human rights standpoint, the right to be unseen, to move through the world without generating a permanent data trail, is perhaps the most vital foundation required for the right to be free.
Leo's trajectory is the intended manifestation of surveillance capitalism and algorithmic governmentality. To grasp this, we have to examine the evolution of Foucauldian biopolitics.
Michel Foucault conceptualized biopolitics as a state-centric phenomenon. In the 18th and 19th centuries, the state shifted from exercising the power of death to actively managing and optimizing the collective life of the population.
Creating public health institutions, gathering demographic statistics, managing urban hygiene to ensure a productive population. It was power exercised through the optimization of biology.
But today, that paradigm has mutated. The management of human populations is no longer the exclusive domain of the state. It is overwhelmingly driven by corporate power and executed through algorithmic governance.
The biological subject of the 20th century has been comprehensively transformed into the highly commodifiable, data-producing asset of the 21st century.
This is the operational core of surveillance capitalism. Human experience itself is the raw material. Every prolonged gaze at a screen, every geographic coordinate tracked by a smartphone, every micro-fluctuation in heart rate monitored by a wearable.
It is all extracted without explicit comprehension by the user. This data is categorized as behavioral surplus. It's a surplus because they extract far more data than is required to simply provide the service.
And this surplus isn't just used to target advertising. That's a huge misconception. The surplus is utilized to train highly sophisticated autonomous predictive models.
These models are the engine of algorithmic governmentality. Power operates entirely invisibly. It doesn't command action or use physical coercion. It functions by continuously predicting, subtly shaping, and imperceptibly nudging human choices at a subconscious level.
The architecture engineers the environment so flawlessly that you automatically, seemingly voluntarily, gravitate toward the exact behavior desired by the corporate platform or the partnered state apparatus.
This continuous, decentralized observation creates a perfected digital panopticon. The original panopticon was Jeremy Bentham's 18th century architectural design for prisons.
A circular arrangement of transparent cells surrounding a central watchtower. The crucial mechanism was that prisoners could be watched by a single guard at any moment, but they could never know exactly when the guard's gaze was directed at them.
Because the threat of surveillance was constant and unverifiable, the prisoners were forced to internalize the discipline. They perpetually regulated their own behavior, acting as their own guards.
The modern digital environment replicates Bentham's architecture perfectly, but on a frictionless global scale. Surveillance is completely decentralized through the devices we voluntarily carry.
It operates continuously, and it is entirely invisible behind our screens. The user fully internalizes the monitoring, just like Leo involuntarily adjusting his posture at the lamppost.
You constantly self-regulate your search queries. You backspace and delete social media statements, operating under the implicit knowledge that every action is recorded, analyzed, and stored permanently.
The philosophical implications of inhabiting this digital panopticon are profound, especially when analyzed through Martin Heidegger's critique of technology.
Heidegger argued that modern technology is not neutral. It isn't just a collection of tools. It constitutes a distinct, totalizing worldview, a conceptual framework he termed inframing, or Gestell.
This worldview dictates how reality reveals itself. Inframing reduces all of nature and ultimately human existence itself to a calculable, quantifiable, and extractable resource.
A reduced state he termed standing reserve. Under surveillance capitalism, the human being is entirely stripped of intrinsic value, moral complexity, and narrative agency.
You are reduced to standing reserve, nothing more than a biological data mine, a raw material to be constantly extracted and optimized for systemic efficiency and corporate profit.
This reduction leads directly to the chilling concept of inhuman hermeneutics. Hermeneutics is the traditional study of interpretation and meaning.
Historically, humans interpreted other humans based on empathy, shared context, and the narrative meaning of a life lived. In the context of big data, that humanistic interpretation is abolished.
You are no longer interpreted by humans based on your intentions or your struggles. You are interpreted entirely through autonomous algorithmic systems. You are defined by digital profiles completely detached from human meaning.
The algorithm assessing your behavioral surplus doesn't possess the capacity to know why you paused on a video regarding a political protest or why you searched a specific medical term.
It only registers the data point to categorize you and statistically predict your next profitable action. Your complex, contradictory human existence is reduced to a flattened data self.
Evaluated, sorted, financially scored, and managed without a single drop of human empathy. This represents the perfected expression of neoliberal rationality.
Driving the absolute commodification of the most intimate aspects of life, everyday actions, private emotional states, basic biological existence, all transformed into tradable data assets.
This relentless drive for algorithmic optimization results in the sociological state Herbert Marcuse described as the one-dimensional man.
In this state, the individual's critical agency, their capacity for authentic dissent, and their ability to conceptualize an alternative reality are completely neutralized.
These vital capacities are quietly substituted by invisible algorithmic management. The systems are designed to be so overwhelmingly convenient, so seamlessly integrated into daily survival, that you voluntarily relinquish the mental friction required for deep critical thought and democratic self-governance.
Bringing these three pillars together, the comprehensive architecture of modern control becomes terrifyingly clear. Contemporary power structures absolutely do not rely on overt physical violence to maintain their authority.
Whether we look at the precise legal frameworks meticulously designed by autocratic legalists to hollow out democratic institutions without breaking a single law,
or the profound sociological pressures of corporate conformity and digital cancel culture that force us into rigorous self-censorship,
or the omnipresent algorithms of surveillance capitalism that predict and nudge our most intimate behaviors, the underlying mechanism remains identical.
These overlapping structures engineer highly controlled environments where the most rational, frictionless, and professionally safe choice for the individual is to voluntarily surrender their autonomy, their critical thought, and their privacy. The modern cage is not built with iron bars or enforced by armed guards. It is built with the seductive comfort of convenience, the impenetrable shield of legal legitimacy, and the deeply ingrained human terror of social isolation.
The ultimate triumph of these overlapping systems of control is their complete integration into the fabric of convenience and stability. When the mechanisms of our own erasure are packaged as professional success, civic harmony, and digital connectivity, the very concept of a private, unmonitored, and uncurated human self ceases to be a right and simply fades into a historical artifact.